Hi everybody, welcome to the next video on my channel, which still has no name. If you've got an idea for a good name, please leave it in the comments. I believe the fruit asshole is already taken, so not that one. This video is going to be about coconuts and how to get into them, how to eat them, how to drink them. If you are lucky enough to live in a tropical area and you have coconut trees around you, most of the videos that I've found on YouTube fall into basically two categories. One class, they're in Southeast Asia where they're preparing coconuts for export, where they're pulling the husks off or they're shaving the husks down from the green ones, and that's basically to reduce shipping weight to ship them up here. And then the other class of videos I find is people getting those dehusked round balls of coconuts or the shaved down kind of angular green coconuts and telling you how to get into those. And if you just have a coconut that looks like this, those videos are not very helpful to you. So if you want to eat this thing, that's what this video is for. So the first thing I want to talk about is, you can see there are a lot of different ways that these whole coconuts can look. They come in different colors. This one is totally brown and dry and wrinkled. The rest of these are, fairly moist inside in the husk, and they come in different ripenesses as well. You can hear this one is a little bit easier to hear. I think the dry husk, maybe microphone's a little bit better. This one, nothing. That's because the nut inside there is completely full with water. The air pocket that allows you to hear the shake does not form until the later stages of ripening. So most of these, that one's also a younger one. Most of these are ripe enough. That one's also a young one. That one shakes good. So you've got different colors, you've got different sizes, you've got different ages or stages of ripening, and all of those things can go into picking a good coconut. But basically, if you see coconuts on a tree, you can eat them. If they're really little tiny ones, they may only just have a little water in them, but you can drink it. The really young ones, the water is a little bit more tart. As they get more mature, the water gets a little bit sweeter and has a little bit more of a coconutty, fatty flavor to it. And I kind of like that water better. But the totally mature ones, the meat is going to be really hard and chewy and difficult to separate from the shell. When you have them young, young enough that that you can't hear them shake, or younger than that, if you get them at a certain stage, the meat is going to be like jelly. You can scoop it out with a spoon, it's delicious. If you get a little bit more mature, the meat is going to be thicker. You can still get it out with a spoon and it's going to flop around like, not sure what you'd compare that to, and then when you get it totally mature and dry, like this guy, it's going to be very hard and similar to the coconut that you could buy in a store, and like you could shred it up and it'll be like the coconut shreds or something like that. So this one came from a tree that is too high up for me to reach with my pole saw. That's another thing. If you want to pick one of these, what I recommend is find a tree that's short enough that you can reach it with a pole saw. And almost every hardware store sells a telescoping pole that has a saw on the end of it. You just reach up and cut them down, or you just wait around until they're ripe enough and they fall off. So this one is fairly young. I think that one's still good. If you saw it fall off the tree, or if you saw it under the tree and it wasn't there yesterday, it's probably good. If you see it a long time after that, or you don't know how long ago it fell off the tree, there's a good chance it's actually not good. So I recommend cutting them down off the tree if you can. I like the softer meat better than the really hard dry meat, and even the jelly that you just spoon out and it's like just like jelly is quite good. Hopefully we'll get to see some of that in a bit. And now I guess we'll move on to how to get into them. So once you've got your coconut, you've decided you wanted to... Oh, another thing about stage of ripeness, I'll go back to that. You notice how this one is kind of wrinkly? A lot of times when they're in the later stages of drying down at the end of ripening, they will develop wrinkles. They'll get a little more pale. So if you're watching a coconut tree, and the coconuts, they're always popping out flowers. They just pop out and they grow little coconuts, and then they go a little farther down and get bigger, and eventually they fall off. And so the tree will have usually coconuts at different stages of ripeness on it at any given time, from flowers all the way to dry ones that are about to fall off. And it can be hard to tell where they are along that process. At the end, it's easier to tell if you see one that's dry, if you see one that's wrinkly, it's at the end. Otherwise, it can be difficult to tell. Like this one is, that's ripe, but it's hard to tell that from looking at it. You can see it's getting a little bit wrinkled around there. If you see that sticking out the end of a big bunch of coconuts, you can say, oh, I see some wrinkles, but that's not always a good way. Like you see this one's smooth. There are no wrinkles, and it doesn't shake. So that's one way you can tell. But as long as it's young enough that it doesn't have wrinkles, it's really hard to tell what stage it's at. If it's like the spoon jelly or like the thick jelly. I prefer the thick jelly, but it's hard to tell, and size is no indication. As you see, this one is ripe, this one not yet, and they are very different sizes.
Is that the same species?
I believe they are all Cocos nucifera, but there are a lot of different varieties. The color is by variety and size, and also the height of the tree, or how fast the tree gets tall, is also in the variety. And there are also disease resistances that differ in the different varieties. There's a disease called lethal yellowing that came by South Florida and wiped out a lot of the taller coconut trees. But some of them are supposed to be a little more resistant, and so anyway, I don't know a whole lot about lethal yellowing, but one of the reasons that you want to know if your coconut is mature or not is how hard is it going to be to get through the shell. The shells of mature coconuts are very hard, and the shells of young coconuts are soft, so they're easy to get through, and we will show you that in just a minute. There are a number of different tools that you might use to puncture a coconut to take the water out, and I recommend that as the first step, because if you just chop the coconut open to get the meat out, you're going to lose the water, and I think the water is a wonderful part of the coconut. I really like drinking it, and I can actually drink a lot more coconut's worth of water than I can eat of the meat. So that's the part I like. There are a lot of different tools. This is one of them I just got. This was, it's made of carbon steel, so it does leave some marks and rust, and so you need to take care of that. These are pretty cheap. There's another one with a T-shape. It's got a handle, and it's got like kind of a curved thing that you'd stick down the top of it. Both of those types really only work on young coconuts that are young enough that the shell is still soft. When you get it this mature, or even this mature, the shell is going to be too hard, and this isn't going to be able to get into it. And I'll show you some other techniques after that, but for this one I'm going to pick with this guy. I'm going to try to puncture this one. First I'm going to give it a rinse, because you never know what's on the surface, dust and whatever. So this device, I sharpened this a little bit with a chainsaw file on the inside because it needed some sharpening. It's not real sharp yet, but it's better than it was when it came. And so you just kind of go into this here. The reason I'm going in at the top is because the top part of the shell is usually a little bit thinner, and this one went right in. So they're different. Sometimes the water is under pressure and is actually going to squirt out at you. So I've got this little thing to poke that out with, but there are various options now that you have a little hole in your coconut. You can stick a straw in it and drink it. But I've heard that those are evil now, so we're going to not do that right now. The other thing you can do is just pour it out into a cup.
For people who may not be familiar with coconut water, what should it look like? Should it be clear like regular water? Will it be murky? Will you find bits floating around in it?
It can be all of those things. If it has a lot of stuff, if it smells bad, it's probably not good. A lot of times when I get water out of whole coconuts, it can have a bit of a pungent flavor. Like maybe it's starting to go bad. I'm not really sure, but I've still been drinking it, and or maybe it's starting to ferment. Haven't had any that tasted alcoholic. I would throw that out, but the pungent flavor hasn't hurt me yet, so I've been drinking them. It's fine. Pro tip: stick this in the fridge overnight, and it'll be chilled when you get it out. So I'm going to go sample this, or maybe let's bring it over here, and you can look into it. And you can see it's fairly clear. There's a little bit of stuff floating around in it. Sometimes they're a little bit foggy. Sometimes if it oxidizes, it can turn a little bit pink. It smells good. Yeah, I like that. So this thing has a little poker that you can, that was the piece of the coconut that there's the skin and there's the inside. And this is going to need to be cleaned and probably oiled to keep it from rusting. So what do you do when you want to get the water out of a more mature coconut and one of the little pokers is not going to be able to cut through that hard shell? There are a few things you can do for that. One method is you shave down the coconut with a machete. It's a little bit dangerous. I've done that plenty of times without hurting myself. There are people who are really good who can just knock the top off of it in one chop and then stick a straw in it. I'm not that good. I shave it down until I get just through the shell, and then I put a straw in it. The other thing is, a lot of people don't have a machete around. A lot of people don't have one of these around. But a lot of people do have one of these. And I've got I think this is called a speed bit on here. A regular spiral bit will work also. I don't recommend a paddle bit. I've tried that, and the paddle bit tends to ball up a wad of stuff that gets pushed inside and then clogs the hole, so it's hard to drain. If you're using a bit this size or smaller, you'll probably need to put in two holes. One on the bottom where it's on the top when you drill it. Then you flip it over and put it on whatever you're draining it into, and then you want to drill another hole on the top to let the air in, and that helps the water come out faster. Larger holes, and from this thing, as you saw, the water came out pretty well without having to drill an air hole. So I'm going to go and drill this one. Need to go plug this in. If you have a cordless drill, that would be better, but I don't. So got this. Now this one doesn't work as well, I think, as the regular spiral bit. I've got a little hung up on the shell, and you can see that there's a lot of little bits of stuff that this makes, and that is not real good to have in the water. So another thing that you're going to want if you're drilling is a coffee screen. This is a pretty good device for screening out a lot of the sawdust that comes in from drilling. I think that one's about empty. And you can see that the screen caught a lot of the gunk, and this water it's a little bit foggy, and that looks just about perfect to me. So the next thing is, once you've got the water drained out of your coconut, you're going to want to get into it to eat the meat part. There are a few different ways that you can do that. My preference is machete. If you don't have a machete, maybe you have an axe or a hatchet, that'll work too. If you don't have one of those, maybe you could just find a big rock and smash the thing. But we're going to use a machete, and we're going to go right outside and do that now. Got a little drizzle. So when you are chopping a coconut with a machete, you want your machete to be sharp, which means you have to learn how to sharpen your machete because they generally don't come that way. The other thing is, if you have a sharp machete, you don't want that nice edge to hit the ground because the ground has sand and rocks, and that is bad for edges. So we're going to be using this stump here from a tree that came down in the recent hurricane. Any piece of wood will do. Also a mulched flower bed with thick mulch that where you're going to just hit the mulch instead of the sand, that's good too. So we'll put this here. The squirrels have been enjoying this as a spot for them to eat their acorns. So I'm going to try to just split this right in half, and we'll see how good my aim is today. That went pretty well. You can see this one has barely any meat. We'll go inside and I'll get a spoon and we'll show you what that looks like. Alright, so it looks like I got a little bit of the shell in there when I chopped it open. There's a little other thing. So most of the meat is down at the bottom here, and you can see this just comes right out. It's soft like jelly. You want to just be careful when you scrape that you don't get any of the underneath part that doesn't taste as good. But basically that's what we get inside of a very young coconut. Oh, that's delicious. So this one had very little meat. This was a very young coconut. I'm going to eat this one too, since that goes so fast. There's a little bit more in this one. I didn't cut them exactly in half. But yeah, so you see that's basically what there is.
Now it looks like you cut it in half vertically.
Mm-hmm.
Was that an intentional thing?
That is how I generally do it. I don't know if that's what you need to do, but just what I've been doing.
It looks like cutting it vertically, you have a better chance of going through the center, whereas if you cut it horizontally, you may have been off with the actual, I'm not sure the appropriate term, but the hollow of the coconut.
Yeah, you see the top part has a lot more husk than the bottom part. So the nut is not centered within the husk, and that's generally what all the coconuts are like. There's more on the top than down here. Let's get the mature coconut, and we'll go chop that one. And I missed the center on this one, so I'm going to chop the big one again.
Why are you chopping it again? To me, it looks like you can get to everything.
I can, but it's harder.
Okay.
So it's just a little bit easier if I make it smaller pieces. Now sometimes these get little bits of husk or shell inside them. I'm going to go rinse that off. So now you have the coconut chopped open and you can access the meat. As you can see, this husk was not an impediment to us. A lot of people, when they first get a whole coconut, they spend a lot of effort trying to pull the husk off of the shell, and that's really just unnecessary. Most of the coconuts that you see that are dehusked when you get them in the grocery store are that way because they do that to reduce shipping weight, and that's really the only reason for that. These are just ignore the husk. You just chop right through it, or you drill right through it, or whatever. So one thing you can do to get in there, you can use a spoon, and I would recommend kind of going around the edge until you can pop out the whole thing. This spoon is a fairly thick one. You look at the thickness of that handle. Most spoons, if you try to scoop coconuts with them, you're going to bend the hell out of that spoon. This one also I worked on that edge a little bit, and it's not what I would call sharp, but it comes to a pretty narrow area. I think if it was real sharp, it would dig into the stuff I don't want to dig into. But this works pretty well. The other thing is, I bought this on Amazon. This is actually a purpose-built coconut scraping tool, and this works better than the spoon. It does have a little bit more, does leave a little bit more shell on there that you might want to trim off at the end. Yeah, there just went right under the wrong part of the shell, but this works better than the spoon. So I recommend, if you're going to be eating a lot of coconuts, it's a lot easier too. It's much easier on my hand. When I've done this with this spoon a lot, and I get a big bruise on the inside of my hand after a while. This one has a much more comfortable handle. So you go around here.
How much was that tool?
I think it was less than $10. I don't remember exactly how much it was. So you do that, you get this out. A lot of this stuff is, you won't even notice that when you eat it. Some of it, like this part, that's shell. That's going to be hard. You want to get that off. And if you want to do it just for presentation, you can get a little knife and you can trim that off. But this is basically edible as is. So another thing you can do, if you can't wait for the Amazon shipping, if you have a coconut emergency and you need to scoop some coconuts right away, and none of your spoons are up to the task, most grocery stores, I think, have a knife or tool that looks a whole lot like this, but it's for oysters. And it's not bent. It's a lot like this part, but not bent. So I haven't tried this, but I expect if you get one of those oyster tools and you get a pair of pliers and you bend it, that might be able to do what this little scraper does, kind of going around the curves of the coconut. It works better if you pay attention to it instead of worrying about talking, but basically that's how you do it, and I recommend getting one of these if you're going to be scooping a lot of coconuts. There are a lot of other tools. There are rotary scrapers and other things that turn it into lots of little ribbony stuff. This is what I like. So that was my video on coconuts. To recap, there are a lot of different kinds of coconuts. They're all good to eat. You can get them at different stages of ripeness and use them in different ways. And there are various tools that you might want to use to get into the coconuts. There are various stabbing tools that you can use for young coconuts, or you can use a drill for bigger coconuts, and I think I recommend using this style of bit. I think they get a little bit less hung up on the hard shell. Then you'll want to get a machete, which is still outside in the stump. I'm going to have to get that and clean and oil it, which you have to do every time you use a machete, especially on something that's kind of wet and oily like that. It's going to get a bunch of black gunk staining on it. And I recommend putting them in the fridge before you drink them. That makes the water pre-chilled. And it should be foggy and not have too much debris in it. You can have little bits of stuff. And if you're going to drill it and get lots of little bits of stuff, get a coffee screen. And then once you want to scoop, if you want to scoop any mature coconuts, get one of these guys. And I think that is a good summation for the whole video. Thank you for watching. I hope this was enjoyable and useful.